The Pharisees and some of the teachers of the law who had come from Jerusalem gathered around Jesus, and when they saw some of his disciples eat bread with unwashed hands, they found fault. They found fault. I think one of the things I liked least in the ministry was people who habitually found fault. I always envied Tony Campolo's ability to deal with them. One woman came to him after church and said, "Did you know you had 3 grammatical errors in your prayer this morning?" And he looked at her and said, "I wasn't talking to you." The Pharisees represent that sector of society that major on rule. They loved making rules. They've been making them for centuries since then. Do you know that today the Orthodox Jews, who are the natural descendants of the Pharisees, have to obey 613 rules? Very burdensome. Now, I've got nothing against rules per se. I think they can be a useful kind of shorthand in life. I've got some rules that I live by. One is first arrangement stand, and if something more attractive comes up, I stick with the first arrangement. That stood me in good stead. I had rules for my children up to the age of 12, and I expected them to obey them. But I get very uncomfortable with people who major on rules, and particularly when they try to apply them to adults. And there are certain red light words for me. One of them is the word ought. You ought to do this, you ought to do that. I call that the hardening of the auguries. And the word should, and the word must. The word must is quite a South African word, actually. Elephants get must, and it makes them very dangerous. It might make quite a good discussion question in your home group. What makes people so attracted to rules? I can give a couple of thoughts on that. I think rules give people a sense of security who actually are inwardly very insecure. I think rules enable people not to think too deeply. And worst of all, I think that rules enable people to box other people, to judge them, and worst of all, to control them. And now Jesus takes on the Pharisees on the issue of rule. They've chosen to criticize the disciples on the issue of what we eat and how we eat and what can make us ceremonially unclean. And Jesus cuts right through their rules by saying nothing going into a person can make them ceremonially unclean. And then Mark adds a delightful sentence, "In saying this, Jesus declared all foods clean." So from that day, we've been able to eat bacon and egg. It was the end of rules. Now, what Jesus is doing here is he's discerning between 2 very important things. On the one hand, there are the commands of God, the principles of God that are eternal, and they apply to all human beings for all kind. On the other hand, there are rules, some of them in the Bible, many of them added by the Pharisees, that are actually intended only for the Jewish people under the Old Covenant. In fact, a lot of those rules you can only keep if you're living in the land of Palestine. And Jesus cuts right through those rules. And then Jesus turns to the people. Now notice that he turns to the people. He doesn't continue his conversation with the Pharisees. Some people are so set in their thinking that it's not worth continuing to argue with them. But he turns to the people around him and he says this, "It is from within, out of a person's heart, that evil thoughts come. Sexual immorality, theft, murder," and so on. He gives a long list. Now, in saying this, Jesus has uncovered a very important principle of human living and a very important truth about human beings. All of our actions arise out of a 3-phase process. It always begins in the heart. It then progresses to the thoughts, and then it comes to deeds. The problem with rules is they only deal with the deeds. They don't get to the heart. The Bible has a lot to say about the heart. Solomon says, "Son, guard your heart, because it is the wellspring of life." He also says, the heart of the human is deceitful above all things. Now that is sinfulness, but it also means it's actually very hard to discern what's really in your heart. And I think we discover what's really in our heart when we're under pressure. Or sometimes, ironically, when we're not under pressure and when we're not guarding ourselves. Sometimes we see our heart through our dreams. Freud said you will see your heart through your Freudian slips of the tongue. but guard your heart, because that's what really matters. I once had a phone call from a woman. I'll call her Sue. For a whole hour, she told me everything that was wrong with me. I probably shouldn't have let that go on for an hour. But at the end of that hour, I said, Sue, won't you answer one question for me? Do you think my heart is right? And she paused for a while, and then she said, yes, I think your heart is right. Now, I'm sure a lot of what Sue said was right, and I know I have a lot of faults that I still can't get rid of. But I can live with that if my heart is right, because God looks on the heart. When David sinned those terrible sins, yes, he confessed his deeds, but he also said, create in me a clean heart, O God. As the song says, change my heart, O God. Make it ever true. Change my heart, O God. Let me be like you.
Change my heart, O God. Make it ever true. Change my heart, O God. May I be